Hey everyone, I'm excited for another interview today, and I am pleased to welcome Cameron Michaels on as our guest today. So, Cameron Michaels is an epic fantasy author currently residing in Mesa, Arizona. Homeschooled and growing up reading the Chronicles of Narnia, Cameron has always dreamed of other worlds that he desperately wanted to put to page. When he's not writing, Cameron enjoys watching people play Dungeons and Dragons, anime, podcasting, and of course, reading fantasy. So, welcome, Cameron.
Hello, it's good to be on.
Awesome. Yeah, I saw that oh, what was it? I saw that you had put in like an interest into the interview form, and I was like, "Oh, I'm really excited because I was like thinking of interviewing you already." And just cuz like I read The Fated Dragon, which is your first
Yeah,
book, and I think I was introduced to your book. I think it was like a year ago or something. I think you were releasing it and you had messaged
yeah.
me about being an ARC reader. And just so you know, I like barely like look at those. I don't know why. Like they're just like, oh, I'm not interested or whatever. But yours caught my
Yeah.
eye, and I was like, oh, interesting. It's like epic fantasy with a bit of mystery, and so I was like, oh, that sounds interesting up my alley. So, and I really enjoyed the book. So I am like really happy to have you here so I can talk to you about it.
Well, I'm really glad that you enjoyed it. Honestly, the best selling point for like introducing my book to anyone is just throw the cover in their face. That's
Right.
probably like honestly, that's like I already have trouble like explaining to people like what the book is even about just because I'm terrible at giving synopsis for anything. So I'm just like, here, just look at it.
Right, right, right. Like the judging a book by its cover is totally true. They're just like, here, you
Yeah.
like this cover? It just, would you want to read
This
it?
cover that I totally didn't have anything in like Illustrator or anything like that. Look at that. Yeah, the
Yeah,
insight's probably just as good. Maybe, probably.
I know. It's like, oh, my cover's really pretty. I think you'll really like the cover, but then they open the page and then you start getting terrified. Like, oh, what if they hate it?
What if they don't like what I wrote? What if it's horrible and they think it's bad?
Yeah, exactly. All right. So, I am excited to get to know you a little bit better. So, tell us a little bit about when writing started for you and what your journey has been like with that.
Well, I've had the dream to publish a book since I was like old enough to pick up a pencil, honestly. I've been My family will tell you that I like tried writing stories when I was like a little kid. I've always had a fascination with telling stories in that way. Um, I have a lot of embarrassing moments of my life because of that, where I'd just be like, "Look, mom, I wrote this 100-page book," and like 75% of it was pictures, and then 25% of it was just like a sentence on a page, just to say I hit 100 pages. And then when like junior high, high school hit was when I really decided, you know what, I think I actually want to try my hand at writing a full-length novel. And I started writing it in a notepad, which was the first mistake because I don't know who is able to write books with a pencil. It just is the worst. Um, but I tried and had a lot of fun with it. It didn't end up working out, but it was really, really cool and really fun. And then I want to say I was about 16. I sketch just for fun. I'm not like crazy good at it or anything like that, but I just sketch for fun. And a lot of times I like to sketch fantasy characters. And what I ended up doing in like a very specific sketchbook, I started sketching characters that I saw fitting into a specific world, like all in the same shared world, and started coming up with backstories for all of these different characters that I was drawing, and was like, yeah, maybe one day I'll take these characters that I've put in this sketchbook and turn it into a story. And that's how the Faded Dragon came about, was from those sketches. And then in 2019, I finally sat down and was like, I'll write it. And so I wrote the prologue, like a rough draft of the prologue and part of the first chapter, and didn't touch it for a year. And then obviously the pandemic hit, and I had a lot of free time and was like, yeah, sure, I'll pick it up, and just kept on writing for like a solid 9 months, and then got a rough draft and then went through the editing process and all of that. And now somehow we're here.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. So, like, I was just having some like thoughts going through my head as you were telling all that. So, that's really cool that you started out with like drawing pictures of your
Yeah.
characters and your stories, and like that's impressive that you tried to hit like the 100-page mark because that was also me as a kid, but I
Yep.
only had like 10 pages of a story. And then when I wrote my first chapter book, it was only like 20 pages long. And I thought it
Yeah.
was like the most epic thing ever. But like that's really impressive that you got up to that word count or that word count, that page count.
Well, I mean, it doesn't really count. There was really like 2 or 3 words on every page, and then the other pages were just pictures that I drew in like 10 seconds just to say, look, it's a full page, because I read The Invention of Hugo Cabret,
Mm.
which has a bunch of illustration. Like, the
Oh,
point of the
right.
story is that it's told through pictures and images, because the whole book is about like filmmaking and stuff like that. And I saw it and was like, I could do that. I could skip having to write all these words on these pages, and I could just make a giant book and say I wrote it, but it'll actually just be pictures. It didn't work out. Didn't work out at all.
That's great. And do you still keep up drawing?
Yeah, every once in a while. It's been a while, but I enjoy doing it. I actually have like the sketchbook that I used for like the characters with me. Um, like every once in a while I'll sit down and do it, but it's not like a constant thing that I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I've let drawing kind of fizzle out for me, but that's really cool. That's where it started from, and you got that inspiration to write. And in your bio, I had forgotten to like mention this earlier, but you were homeschooled.
I was.
And so did that like help like when you're being homeschooled, did you have I'm sure you had a lot more time to, draw, to explore these stories and these characters.
Yeah, that definitely helped a lot with just, I would say, the creative side of things. Um I am not in the camp of like homeschooling is the end all be all for things, but it definitely for me helped in really being able to explore, especially drawing. Growing up, I did a lot more drawing than I did writing. There was even at one point I tried to make a graphic novel. Um, so those two things kind of meshed together. So yeah, I would definitely say that homeschooling gave me a really big benefit, because I could just be like, okay, I'm just going to get all my school done while quote unquote class is going on. And then I just have the rest of the day to do just sketch or just write or whatever.
Right. And it's true, like homeschool's not the end all be all, but like I can totally see that. And I was homeschooled during like my elementary years. And
Yeah.
like I totally get like you have that time to just sketch, to explore, to create. And then you go to public school and then it just all dies.
Yeah.
Or at least that was my experience. It's not like that for everybody, but like, gosh, like public school. But anyway, that's a discussion for another day. Um, so you wrote The Faded Dragon, and then what inspired you to go the indie route?
Well, when I first finished it, I did look into a lot of publishing opportunities, because I was worried that I wouldn't be able to quote unquote make it as a self-published author. So I looked into finding agents. I did all the whole process with that, submitting sample chapters, all of that to agents, and even looked into publishing companies that didn't require an agent. I even did I forget what it was. It was like a competition that one publishing company was doing that I entered. And if you won the competition, you were able to get a contract to get your book published with that company. I didn't end up winning overall, but yeah, I was really pushing hard to get traditionally published. And I ended up just seeing how other self-publishing authors were doing it and really just became more fascinated with it. I'd say my biggest inspiration for that was an author named Ben Galley, who had a big who was a big reason for why I even started writing again in the first place, just because I picked up reading again because of some of the books I read of his. And he's a self-published author who did all these things and had all these tips. And I started researching it. I started looking into some of the tips he had and was like, okay, I think I actually not that I could do it, but that I would get more enjoyment out of doing it that way. And so, because it was causing me a lot of stress looking for the agent and doing it when I really felt like a lot of the stuff I could do myself anyway. So I ultimately just decided to go that route. And honestly, I don't regret it. To be honest, I really am happy that I went this route.
Yeah, it's a really good route to go, and it allows, I think, just living in this day and age that we're in where we can just get our work out there and
Yeah.
publish. It's an amazing opportunity where authors years ago, like, they had to send in the query letters and,
Hmm.
hope that an agent and editor just saw potential in them. But now we can just put our work out there.
That was one of the hardest things for me was the first time I ever got rejected by an agency. That is just crushing. And you shouldn't take it personally because ultimately they're just doing their job. But at the same time, you're like, I put so much work into this, into writing this book and then doing the query letter and setting up all the sample chapter stuff. I even took classes on how to do all that stuff and it still didn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
It's just disheartening. And I'm not saying traditionally publishing is a bad route to go. If you can go that route, I mean, that's great, but it can be demoralizing for sure.
It really is. And what I find really interesting is all these agents are rejecting a manuscript. And then when I hear of authors who eventually just decide they're going to go indie, and all of a sudden they get all these readers who are just clamoring
Yeah.
after the book and like saying it's incredible, it's their favorite. And it's like, I understand that publishing is a business and that agents are looking for the next best selling novel, basically. Um, or not even best selling, but just a book that will sell.
Yeah.
And so I understand that, but it's at the same time it's like readers are wanting this story. So it's just interesting to seeing how like they're trying to figure out, okay, what book is going to sell, but readers are going to still like this.
Well, I think with traditional publishing, they're looking for the current trends, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
will usually accept based on like what is working right now. Like you said, that will sell. Where self-publishing is kind of like ex I don't care. It's extremely experimental. You can get
Right.
more or less. You can get I think self-publishing warrants you to get some of the greatest stories that you've ever read while also maybe some of the worst. Not, I mean, I don't have a whole lot of experience with that, but just with the whole idea of how experimental self-publishing can be, because you can tell literally any story you want and promote it yourself.
Mm-hmm. Right. And like indie authors don't like, I mean, not every, there's some indie authors who are incredibly successful at like
Yeah.
selling their books and stuff. But even if you're not, it's like, hey, I got my book out there and I do have
Yeah.
readers and everything.
You don't go into whether it's traditional publishing or self-publishing, you don't go into it being like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to make millions. I'm going to
Right.
be a self-published author." Like my dad was like, "Cameron, I'm going to like will your book into best-selling. Like it's going to happen." And I was like, "That's not like I'm happy that you're so very supportive of me, but like the reason you do it is when you get even if it's a couple readers who are like this book was great and I really enjoyed reading it. It's like yes,
Yeah.
this is why I did it.
Right. Right. And I think like having that mentality is so important too, to just realize that even if you just have a small support group, like, and you just enjoy just the writing process, that's ultimately what matters.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I totally get that. Like my family, they will read my book and they're like, "Oh, when is it going to be like a movie, or do you have like a cast?" Or like my
yeah,
dad doesn't read books at all, so like he doesn't read my books. And that's totally fine. But he's like, When the movie comes out, then I'll see. I'm like,
Because that's a
yeah,
guarantee when
yeah,
a book
like
gets
totally.
published. I'm in control of when a book turns into a movie.
Yeah. So anyway, but like that's really cool that you have that mentality and indie publishing has been working out for you and
Yeah.
the expectations that you have. So let's talk about the Faded Dragon for a little bit. So give us just a brief pitch on what it's about.
Well, as you already said, it's an epic fantasy that takes place in a world where elves have gone extinct and the dragons have vanished from this world. And all that's left are humans, which are de-evolved versions of elves, and this half dragon, half elf species called the Takarn, which have been made slaves by humanity. And there's tensions between these two groups. There's characters on both sides trying to figure things out, and tensions are rising to the point where it's about to scale into a war. But unbeknownst to both sides, there's something far worse and far darker happening behind the scenes.
Love that pitch. Love it. So one of the most unique things that I noticed when reading this is the Takaran species is
Yeah.
this elf dragon combination, and I'm so curious to know what inspired you to do that.
It honestly, that has been the most interesting thing that I've seen with reviews, because I've seen a couple reviews on like Goodreads called the Takarn Fae, which makes me kind of laugh, because it's like, oh gosh, now like my book is gonna be like put in with all these romantasy
Oh
novels,
no.
because now my book apparently has Fae. I just accidentally created a Fae species. So that's great.
I mean, I can kind of see where they're coming from, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. The inspiration was not Fae. I'll be honest, when I wrote it, I didn't even know what Fae was really. Um, I don't know. I I hate to go back to this, but I honestly was just sketching and I was like, what do I want to draw? And I was like, I want to draw a person with just like wings and horns. And then I kept drawing. I was like, ooh, maybe I can give him like a tail and then like claws. And I was like, ooh, this person's like half dragon. That's pretty cool. And that sketch ended up being like what I picture Galea looking like. She was the first real character where I was like, I think this would be the main character of like of this book. And then that is kind of what that's how it came about. And then I started writing the prologue, and I am not a plotter. I am a I am a pantser through and through. I I have an idea of where things are gonna go, but it's not like set in stone. If I have an idea on the fly, I will just go with it. We'll see if that turns out well or not. But I'm writing this prologue about like I wanted dragons and elves, and I was like, ooh, what if I made this species, these descendants of like these two races? And that's how the Takarn came about. Originally, they weren't called the Takarn when I wrote them in the book. Initially, in the book, I'm not going into spoilers. This is like the beginning of the book. The word divider is like a derogatory term for their species that the
Mm.
humans call them. That was originally just their species name. They were just called the dividers. And then as I went on, I was like, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Like everyone else has like a actual name, and they're just called the dividers. So then I came up with the name Takarn. So that was a long response, but
No, I
ultimately
like that.
it happened because I was just winging it,
I
really.
like that. And with the name Takaran, how did you come up with that name? Did like you get inspiration from like Dragon Elf? Like, I don't
I
know.
don't None of the names that I've come up with in my book, Takarn or otherwise, I just kind of think of like letters in my head, and I'm just like, I want a word with a T. T to card. To card. That's what we're doing. That's great. We'll go with it.
Right.
That's how I, and then I will maybe look up online, like, is this a real name? And then if it's a name that's been used before, I will probably not end up using it, or I'll just add a letter that makes it seem more otherworldly. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but that's I just come up with them on the fly.
Yeah. And to the readers out there who wonder how fantasy authors come up with names, this is how we do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll like go to like a fantasy name generator website
Yeah.
and I'll take a like a word that sounds cool and tweak it a little bit with like my own
Hmm.
flair, and so that's another way I do it. But
Give it a
yeah,
cool pronunciation.
yeah, basically. Yeah, if it sounds cool, then you go with it. And then yeah, if it's taken, then that's like the worst.
Some of the names I've actually like when I got my book to go when I was getting it prepared for audiobook and I got a narrator, I gave him like the pronunciation of all the names. There were a couple names that he mispronounced, but after hearing them, I was like, that sounds way better than what it sounded like in my head.
Like, let's just go with it.
That is now the way that it's supposed to be said. That's so good.
Yep. I love that. And there are other really cool fantasy elements in your book, and I'm curious where you got that inspiration from.
Well, it's hard to pinpoint where like a specific inspiration came for some of it. Honestly, it just came from reading a lot of fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't, well, I hadn't been reading for years and years. I hated reading. And it wasn't until around 2020 when I picked up a book called The Written by Ben Galley that really sparked me back into reading because it had some of the classic fantasy tropes, but it flipped them on its head. And I thought that was so cool how it did that. And that got me to go back and listen to The Lord of the Rings on audiobook. I'd never finished The Lord of the Rings all the way through at that point, and that it's like a lot some old classics like The Lord of the Rings, Chronicles of Narnia, and then some new like The Written and some that which got me into self-publishing. It was all of that together that made me think, okay, I can take some of these classic tropes and some of them I can just play through how they normally go, but then I can add like a little bit of a twist on them.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely got those vibes when I was reading it. Like it has a lot of the epic fantasy of like Lord of the Rings or Narnia, or and that's something that I just love because it just feels like a call to home. It feels like
Yeah.
familiar, and I think that's one of the reasons why I was able to just get sucked into it because it of how familiar it felt. Um, and you also have just a couple other things along with the epic fantasy, one of them being more of a political intrigue. And then you also have
Yeah.
a mystery flair to it. And I am just, from a writer's standpoint, I just want to know, how do you do it? Like, how do you do political intrigue? How do you do mystery?
I don't know. I don't know. I That sounds so terrible.
Oh, all of us writers are all like, we don't know what we're doing.
We just look, I'm like of all the people to ask advice for on writing, I'm probably the worst person in the world because someone has asked me like, tell me how you created this vast world, this complex thing. I'm just like, I just like sat down at a computer. I was like really jacked on caffeine and was just like, oh, there could be elves and dragons and they could have a species together. Like, I don't know. I've always loved political intrigue. I think I had watched some of Game of Thrones at that time, and also some of the other series that I'd read had political intrigue. And so I guess it kind of goes into the world building where you create, okay, this is a society that that exists. It's not just a world that people are just kind of wandering around. There has to be some sort of is there a monarchy? Is there that there has to be some sort of politics in here. So then had the opportunity to create what exactly that looked like. And then it helped with the mystery stuff that I just kind of pulled from, okay, there's a main bad guy, but the main characters don't know who that bad guy is. So how can we flesh that out? How can we integrate that into some of the plot lines of the main characters? And then one of the three key characters, Tyrion, obviously his story is focused the most on that mystery aspect of it, where it's directly connected to his drive in the story. So I guess for the mystery, the only advice I could give is just have it be in some way deeply connected to the main character's drive. If it's
Mm.
not connected to their drive, the reader is not going to care.
Yeah, that totally
And
makes
that's all
sense.
yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And yeah, with the political intrigue, that's like a tricky one to do. And
It
like,
helps if you have a character who is a part of the politics. Like
mm,
Tyrion
yeah.
is a key part of the politics, and then what helps with the political intrigue is then you have Galea and Borheim, who are on the complete opposite side of that. So you get to
Mm,
see both. You get to see both angles of that. So if you give the reader the opportunity to see all of the angles of like what what the political hierarchy is like, that can also give an interesting perspective.
got it. Yeah, that
Yeah.
totally makes sense. I'm like right now look thinking about a story idea that I've been brewing in my head, and I think it would be so good if it had some good fleshed out political intrigue in it. And what
Yeah.
you just said right there, it was like, okay, I think I'm going the right direction. I think I'm
Honestly, when
doing good.
you're writing, or at least when I'm writing, I'm not thinking you don't generally think, okay, I want this trope and this trope
Mm-hmm.
unless you've written before. Like my writing the Faded Dragon, I wasn't like, oh, I want this. Maybe for like one trope I did that, but for most of the story, it's like I just have these characters and I want to tell this story, and it just happens to have political intrigue in it.
Okay. Yeah, that
Yeah.
totally makes sense. And I can see that like with the series that I have written and have been publishing. It's like, yeah, that was like exactly like I didn't have any tropes in mind. I just kind of went with it. And it just
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. That's true. Um and so with the series, where do you see it going or how long it would be? Like is it going to be like a trilogy or where are you seeing it going?
The Twin World Saga will be a trilogy. Um, with this story that I am telling, I do have ideas for other stories that can be told in this world. For example, right now, I'm about a quarter of the way through the rough draft of book two, but that hasn't been my primary focus. My primary focus has been on a novella that will take place several hundred years before the Faded Dragon. So the main series will be a trilogy, but I also have plans for other novellas or side stories that can take place in the world as well. But it's a trilogy.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was wondering about that novella because you had announced on your Instagram that you were writing one, and I was
Yeah.
curious to know a bit more about it. So that's really cool that it's weaved into the story. It takes place years before the Fated Dragon. So
Yeah.
that's really cool. So how's that been going?
Slowly, but
Yeah.
it's been going well. It's been really hard to find time to write lately just because life has been crazy, but it's been really enjoyable. Um, I did announce the title for it and the cover for it. Probably announced the cover a little too soon because I thought I would be done with this sooner than I actually am. Um, but the novella is called Where Sirens Roam. So that will give me the opportunity to explore an element of the story that I want to go into, but focus on it a little bit more in this novella. So it's been going pretty well. I've really I've been enjoying it a lot when I've had the time to sit down and write it. I'm nearly done with the rough draft. So hopefully I can get that done soon and then go into the editing stage and just then I can move back to book two.
Nice. Nice, nice. Yeah, that's awesome. And novella writing, like it's kind of nice because it's like a nice break from like the main story, but
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And it's a lot shorter too, so that's like kind of a less pressure kind of thing. At least
Yeah.
that's how I
It
felt.
it felt like a breath of fresh air getting to introduce some characters I hadn't introduced before because it takes place way earlier.
Hmm.
And so it just, I don't know, it felt like a weight was lifted off my chest, at least for a little bit. But now that I'm getting to the end of this, I'm starting to get more excited to go back to the main series. So that way I can just get back to writing the characters that I started with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's great. All right. Well, looking back on like just everything you've been through with writing and publishing, what is one piece of advice you would tell your past self? Or if you wanted to go in the direction of just a general advice to give to aspiring authors, you can answer that too.
I would say don't stretch yourself too thin. And I mean that both with writing and also with the promotional side of it. Because when I was finished writing the first draft of The Faded Dragon and all the edits got in, and then I finally had the final draft, I was really, really pushing to get the book marketed and all of that. And I would say didn't go in with as good of a plan as I should have, and really tried to just put my finger, more or less, put my fingers in all the pies and just like threw my book at every promotional opportunity I possibly could. And was I was barely getting any sleep. I was stressed out all the time about it. If it's causing you that kind of pain, I think you might need to take a step back and just kind of reevaluate where you should how you should be going about this, because this is your story and I understand the want to put it into as many readers' hands as you possibly can, but just throwing money at things that you think might work is not always the best way about going about it. But also, if it's causing you that much stress and pain, I I mean the whole point is that you got so much joy out of writing it and you want people to experience at least some of that when they read it. I don't think it should be such a painful experience either during it or after when you're trying to push the book forward. So I had that experience with the first book during the marketing and promoting side. And then with book two and with Where Sirens Roam, it's hard because these stories are taking me a lot longer to write than the first book did. When I sat down, really sat down in 2020 and started writing The Faded Dragon, it felt like I was just like done. I I just booked it. I can't do that now. I have I have more things that I have to think about. I'm married now. I have a job, like all of these things that I have to consider along with writing, and I have to be okay with that. If I push myself too hard, it's not going to come out the way I want it to. So, yeah, don't stretch yourself too thin. Just keep it enjoyable for as long as you can.
Yeah. I really like that advice. And that's really like the most important is like you are enjoying what you're doing, but you also, yeah, you don't want to stress yourself out over something that, started out as a hobby that you really just liked doing. And
Yeah,
to doing much more than you can handle is not necessarily the best way to go. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I really like that advice. All right. Well, let's get into some rapid fire questions.
All right, I'm
All
ready.
right. So, what is your favorite trope?
This is kind of ironic. Corrupt religious group. I love
Oh,
I love corrupt religious groups. They're so interesting. And I say that being a religious person myself. But I think it's such an interesting way to to take a story having these like religious zealots.
Mm. So
Yeah.
what's a book recommendation that you have that has that trope?
Ooh, there's a lot. Um, mm, oh, oh no, now I'm blanking on which one to pick. Ah,
Your favorite one. The
oh,
whole
oh, I'm not sure if would quite qualify as a corrupt religious group, but Lightbringer is a series. I know a lot of people say are kind of iffy or conflicted on if the Lightbringer series is good, but all of the religious stuff in that series and all kind of the bent religious things in that series are really, really interesting, and I really like it.
I'm writing
Also,
this down.
I'm not sure if that would qualify as corrupt religious group though. Threadlight um, is also really good. Threadlight is a series that I listened to on audiobook last year and was just absolutely blown away by it. That definitely has corrupt religious groups in it.
All right, I'm putting stars next to that one.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, good to know because that's a trope that I would love to read more of.
yeah.
What is your favorite writing drink slash snack?
I don't really eat while I write, but latte. Yeah, definitely a
Yeah,
latte. Just go to some random coffee shop and get a latte, just straight latte. That's like that's the way to do it.
that's awesome. That's great. And then what's your favorite book currently?
I would say The Heart of Stone by Ben Galley. Another Ben Galley book.
Another
This one
Bengali.
is
Okay.
this is a standalone. It's a military fantasy book about
Mm.
a hundred year old stone golem who's like been on both sides of different wars between humanity and has such this interesting take and perspective on humanity as a whole. It's so good. It's so good. It's amazing.
I'll have to look that up. And that author too, because you mentioned him a lot.
Yeah, he is like grimdark, dark fantasy. So if that's not your taste in reading, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. But The Heart of Stone I would say kind of pushes past that because it has a lot of, I mean, it's in the title. It has a lot of heart to it. It's a really great story.
Awesome. All right, good to know. And then what are you working on currently?
Writing, um, I'm working on Where Sirens Roam and a little bit of book two.
A little bit of book too.
Yeah.
All right. And then where can readers find you?
They can find me on Instagram. All my books are on Amazon, in ebook, paperback, hardback, audiobook, all of that. But the main place to find me would be on Instagram.
All right, perfect. And I'll have links to all of that in the show notes, or if you are on YouTube, it'll be in the description below. All right, well, thank you so much, Cameron, for coming on. I had a blast talking to you about all of this, and I hope you have a great day.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me on.
No problem.